Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel and to another explore and walking tour. This time we visit a fortified manor house based on the Gower Peninsula in the south of Wales. It's quite fascinating that you can stand in the very same window as someone important would have half a millennium ago and witness the same unspoiled and gorgeous views over the marshlands and the mudflats. So join us for a wander around Weobley Castle. This was once the home to the Bere family right up until the 15th century. The Beres were stewards to the Lords of Gower and were elegant and a refined family by all accounts. As you can see when you wander around, the amount of domestic niceties that the family had built into their grand manor house, which included fine fireplaces, private rooms and decorative halls, and a sizable guest chamber. It was once one of the more desirable places to live, and a number of high society VIPs also lived here, including Rhys ap Thomas, who was the ally of Henry VII, and also the Mansells, who owned nearby Oxwich Castle. They also had a watchtower in a military style, with the wall tops and the southern west tower moved right up until battlement height, showing us that in conflict they would have still had the right fortifications ready. It's here that luxury and defence went truly hand in hand. The earliest date to the building is of 1304 for its main construction. The first building was in the Hall block, which once suggested that the point of the castle was primarily intended for a home rather than a fortress. And also the two south towers also date back to around that time. The rather open site was enclosed in the second phase of its building, with an addition of a chapel, a solar, and the west gateway. Most of this work was done by David de la Bere, who was the Lord of Gower in the 1300s, but unfortunately the castle was badly damaged by Owain Glyndor's rebellion in the early 15th century. Some of the rooms we've been inside include the cellars of the castle. The cellars would contain all of the various needs for a home. Some cellars would be stocked full with food and items for many months. Other rooms are the private apartments of the Lord, or what's known as a solar, quite distinctive in the fact that they would have usually had a large fireplace and often comfortable window seats, sometimes large enough to serve as a private bedroom cum sitting room. We move on into the exhibit of the castle, put on by Cadu, showcasing various information that covers the Gower and the neighbouring castles that all have a connection. It's great that they've managed to put all of this interesting information into one of the rooms here, making good use of the now empty rooms that have once been lived in. Coming outside of the exhibit room, one of my favourite views here was outside what was the kitchen windows. The views over the marshlands are just so very beautiful, especially on a day like today with its blue skies, but you can imagine how the lords and ladies would have been able to enjoy a view of their daily life, and of course it would have been a great lookout point for any unwanted visitors from afar. The ground floor here is where the kitchen and various service rooms would have been. You can tell this from the extensive amounts of windows, fireplaces and guardrobes. As we peer out of the window, we overlook what was once the old lime kilns too. Being passed through a series of owners for nearly the next 400 years, the castle was leased to Sir William Herbert for 10 years before being bought by the Mansell family, and finally in the 17th century the castle was sold off to the Talbot family, who owned the castle for over 200 years, but didn't actually live, work or carry out any restoration work, and it's now given to state care and cared for by Caddy, who have kept this place open and alive for us to experience its beautiful history. Glyndor's forces attacked the castle several times, and some historians speculate that the castle's owner John was killed during one of these attacks. With the amount of damage that was done to the castle, rather than repair it, the De la Bere family chose to abandon it. Then following later, the next construction didn't take place until the 15th century, when Sir Rhys Thomas was given the land of Weobley from Henry VII. He then added a 2-storey porch block to provide an imposing entrance, which is really cool when you first walk in, as well as more private quarters and storage rooms. And all of them had distinctive Tudor characteristics, including typical flat-headed Tudor windows, or elegant stonework, which you can see when you look around the whole castle. Like many medieval halls, this was the heart of the castle, the place where the De la Beres would have joyfully eaten their meals and wined and dined various important friends. This hall would have been covered in beautiful paintings, possibly family coat of arms, and other important decorations to really show off their wealth and status. Unfortunately, on this level there is a door that leads up to the towers, but sadly they're closed off, possibly for more restoration works, but this would have originally led up to the battlements. The castle buildings are all grouped together around a small courtyard, with some indication of small fortifications. The main exception of this is the southwestern tower, that dated to the mid-13th century. This was originally 2 or 3 stories high, and served as a defensible tower house. All of the main apartments were put up in 2 phases as previously mentioned, around the late 13th century and the early 14th century. It was due to lack of funds that the southern west tower never rose above its foundation levels. The buildings consisted of a series of structures, tower houses, annexes and defensive walls that were all connected with each other in a different and irregular arrangement, making this castle pretty epic in its own right. The main gate was in the west wing and didn't actually have that much defensive value. It only really had a shallow ditch, but it was flanked by the northwest building and the annex, which was called the Cistern Tower. Weirdly enough, not a single arrow slit directed towards the entrance, just small windows. Inside of the gate wing housed an additional living quarter on the upper floor that was separated by passage on the ground floor by a wooden ceiling mounted atop stone corbels. This room was lit by one light windows secured with iron bars, but it had the comforts of side seats and a rounded fireplace. We love the overview of the main house. It looks quite small from the outside, and I guess this castle itself does look quite small, but it's really not to be dismissed. It was small but mighty, and clearly could defend itself in attacks. But it also had the visual impression of being a home to a number of families who would have been very happy here. The chapel had a shallow basin in one of the walls that was used for washing of hands. This building was on the first floor and it would have been accessible from the courtyard by the means of wooden stairs. The small chapel was the perfect place for people to come pray and have some reflection time. Just off of the chapel building, we walked into the eastern part of the castle, near the lime kiln that was once needed for making mortar during the castle's construction process. And if you look around, you can see half-built rooms and a tower-like building, which from research is said to be what was going to be at least 2 stories high and adjacent to the southeast tower. A fireplace and a reasonable sized oven were placed in the ground floor, so there would have been an additional kitchen or a bakery. Our visit today was incredible. It's exactly what we like seeing and exploring, and we also had the place to ourselves. It's a real mind-boggler though that this castle isn't more well known, or on the map more, as it's such a great spot to do some walking and discovering more about the Gower's history. We always enjoy visiting Welsh castles. There really is something so special about them, and we love finding ones like today so we can try and show it off, and hope that you come and explore for yourself. There is free parking just outside next to the farmhouse, where they take a small fee for visiting, or it's free if you're a part of Cadw or English Heritage. Or you can also just purchase some Gower Saltmarsh lamb. So if you've enjoyed watching and walking with us today, please click that like button and consider joining our Patreon or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We want to say a big thank you to our Patreons for their support, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Till next time.